Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Sandrine Buteau. I'm the director of Albertine Bookstore, and it is a great honor to welcome Anne Berest, AM Homes, and Adam Dalva for what I'm sure will be an important conversation on writing memory, family, and legacy. This event is a part of the 10th anniversary celebrations of Albertine. It was made possible by Villa Albertine and by the generous contribution of donors and partners to the Albertine Books Foundation. Before we begin the conversation, I would like to introduce our three speakers. Anne Berest is a French author and screenwriter. The Postcard, translated by Tina Cover and published by Europa in 2023, was her first novel to appear in English. It was a national indie bestseller, a library journal, NPR and Time Best Book of the Year, and the winner of the 2021 US Goncourt Prize. With her sister, Claire Berest, Anne Berest is also the author of Gabrielle, to be published by Europa in 2025. Gabrielle was based on the life of her great-grandmother, Gabrielle Buffet-Picabia, wife of Francis Picabia, Marcel Duchamp lovers and muse, a leader of the French resistance and an art critic of considerable note. Joining Anne Berest is AM Homes. She is the author of 13 books that have been translated into 22 languages, among which are the best-selling memoir The Mistress' Daughter and the novel Unfolding, both published by Penguin Books. She has been the recipient of numerous awards, including fellowships from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Kuhlman Center for Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library. She also writes for film and television and teaches in the creative writing program at Princeton University. Moderating this conversation is Adam Dalva. He's a writer, critic, and editor. His writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, The New York Review of Books, and The Atlantic. He serves on the board of the National Book Critics Circle and is an assistant professor of creative writing at Rutgers University. He's also a contributing fiction editor of the Yale Review. Previously, Adam Dalva was the judge of the 2022 Story Prize, the books editor of Words Without Borders, and the senior fiction editor of Guernica. Before passing on the mic, I would like to remind you that the discussion will last 45 minutes and will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A session, and the signing will take place inside the bookstore at the second story of the bookstore this afternoon. Anne and Adam, I leave you the floor. Thank you.
On? It's on? Are these mics on? Oh, now they are. Look at that. Hi, thank you all for coming out today. It's such an honor for me to be in conversation with these two fabulous authors and also to be celebrating Albertine. I think a lot of us in New York will never forget our first time after this bookstore opened, especially walking upstairs and seeing that amazing ceiling over there. And some of my happiest moments in reading in my 20s were spent in this store right after it opened. So this is a particular thrill. Our conversation will be focused on these great writers' two most recent novels, and I'll just briefly describe them in case you haven't read them yet. The Postcard by Anne is a totally unique, searing family drama. It is incredibly moving. It opens with a postcard with 4 names of Anne's real-life ancestors with no explanation, all 4 of whom had died in the Holocaust, arriving at her mother's house, and the mystery that kind of ensues as a result. The Unfolding, A.M. Holmes' most recent novel, tells the story of, it starts at the 2008 election, and a group of men get together and decide that in 16 years there's going to be a coup, and they're going to have a right-wing rebirth in America. So I don't know. Anyway, but it's also a searing family drama that tells the story of a very complex father-daughter relationship, to say the least. And I did think we might start, before we talk more specifically about the books, by asking about family as a subject. You, in many of your books, deal with family, both fiction and memoir. I think of many of your novels have incredible, dishy drama, but also, as in your memoir, speak about the very complicated nature of family. So why has family been a continued subject for you throughout your career?
I'm really always just writing about human behavior, and I think, it all goes in graduating ways, but there's sort of the family, then the community, then the society, then the government, whatever. So to look at the family is to look at the sort of electron microscope of where does it all start.
And when you are designing your novels, for example,
I wish I designed them, Adam.
when the novels appear in your mind,
Yes.
like Athena and Zeus's
Yeah.
brain,
Yeah.
when that happens, do you build around family structures because they have so much room for drama?
No, I always, in a weird way, I'm always thinking about kind of what is the larger, almost like the nonfiction idea that I'm writing about. So, politics in America, the American dream gone south, or whatever. And then I think it becomes a question then of who's going to help me tell this story. And sometimes it's who's the least likely character to tell the story, such as in The Unfolding.
And what about you? Family is such a subject in your work, and as you heard, your most recent book that's coming out in the spring was actually co-written with your sister. So you are almost a uniquely family-driven writer.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you being here and to thank Villa Albertine. It's a great honor to be part of this 10th birthday celebration. I just want to share something I thought this night. Maybe someone put a spell on my trip in the USA, because the first day I went, I had a horrible cold. This night I woke up with a horrible toothache, and I saw my dentist 3 weeks ago, and I had no problem. And now, because I am not so fluent in English, I asked to print some notes, and they are too little printed. I can't read
It looks
anything.
like the Gutenberg Bible down there.
So I don't know who, but someone is furious that I come back in this city. So thank you for your question about my family. But can you
Like the subject of
Oh,
family.
yes.
And why
Yes.
you choose to write about it.
Yes, when I wrote this book with my sister, Gabrielle, my sister is also a French writer, and we wanted to write a book together, and we wrote a book about our great-grandmother, Gabrielle. And when I wrote this book, it was my first novel. And suddenly, I discovered that writing on my ancestors was something special. It was as if I were a musician, and I had been writing in not the good tune, and suddenly, when I wrote about my family, I was on the good tune. That's strange. And maybe it's because I don't have a lot of imagination. And I discovered that working on my family and on the reality, it was as if I discovered that reality has much more imagination than me. Really. And I often say that when I started to write about my ancestors, I entered my writer's homeland.
And there's so much in your book that makes me think about how little I know about my family, even 2-3 generations up. I wonder if you might talk about the feeling of discovering yourself as you write these books.
Yes, because when I wrote about Gabrielle, I knew nothing about her, just that she was like a witch that my mother hated. And when I wrote about my Rabinovich's family, yes, of course, I know nothing about them, but when you are working on your family tree, when you start, you think that you will never find something. But what I discovered is that when you search, you find. It can take you 10 years, 15 years, but when you start, it's as if the ghosts, the ancestors, they were so happy that you are reminding of them. They send you traces. They send you path to find them, and that's incredible.
I feel that there's no quite easy segue to the topic of your book, so I'm just going to kind of rip the Band-Aid on that one. But I was thinking, as Anne was talking about, how you, in your research process, came to this book, and the relationship of money and politics, and the choice to kind of start in 2008. I mean, I think right now you seem like a super guru to me, because I read this week, right after the election, and I wonder if you might talk a bit about why this subject and how you feel to see a thing you wrote about speculatively really unfolding.
Sure. In danger. But I also just want to, off of what Anne was saying, I think there's something very interesting, because for me, both writing in fiction and in nonfiction or memoir, I realize that there is something that I would describe as there are things that you know that you don't know that you know. And sort of truths and history and things that, as you're going through the process of writing, are confirmed by what you write. And I've had that happen. It's the same sort of, in a weird way, of being prescient and seeing something down the road, but there's some very wild stuff that turned out to all be true that I didn't know, but I sort of knew on a cellular level. So the unfolding, when, as the guys in my book put it, McCain lost to Obama, which is not how I experienced it, but when McCain lost to Obama, they're very upset and they want to reclaim their version of America. And really what I noticed about that election was, so I was here in New York, and there was a sense of enormous hope and possibility, and people were out in the streets celebrating, not fighting. And be careful, that's all I say to myself. And what I noticed was also that a barely latent racism and sexism then began to blossom. And I would just say it has continued to, bloom, really. And I think that's what we're continuing to see with the repeal of Roe and all these things. And also two other just fragmentary elements, but that are really important. One is that the rise of what we call dark money. So back in 2008, if you gave $10,000, that bought you enormous access to a candidate. That is now in the billions of dollars. So you have people like Leonard Leo, and what you can buy with billions of dollars is not just ads, you buy people. So there's that. So that's the rise of dark money. And also 2008 was the first time social media was a part of the election, and I would say the algorithm and all of the sort of propaganda that goes with algorithms. So that's what I was sort of secretly looking at and worried about.
So we'll listen to you next time.
There will be no next time.
Oh, you're right. It's all good from here. On that subject, and of the question of things one knows and things one doesn't know, one thing, we're both writing teachers, and I think I always kind of resist writing cliche, but the truth is stranger than fiction one does, I think, come up when we read your novel. There are astonishing things that seem like coincidences.
Yes.
And yet when one reads it, one believes it. And I wonder what it is to write toward the coincidences. There's one amazing moment, for example, where your own name appears in the book that made me cry. That, many years before you were born, your name appeared in your great aunt's journal. It was unbelievable.
I will give you an example. Is that when I was writing on this book, I was sometimes like in hypnosis, and I was seeing images. And when the book came out, a woman said to me, "You know what? Your grandfather was the first boyfriend of my mother, and her mother was a very famous writer in France. She's named Benoîte Gros, very famous, and she wrote a book with her sister, Flora, and it's a diary of their life as a teenagers during Paris occupation. And it was after I wrote my book. And I started to read, and I saw exactly Benoîte. She says, I met Pasquale. In the book, it's Pasquale, not Vicente. He's the son of this famous painter. And so I didn't know when I was writing the postcard. And what gave me shivers is that she said some details about him that I knew and that I wrote in my book. So.
That you didn't know was real.
Yes.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly.
Those uncanny things.
Yes. Yeah.
That's.
I know that happened to you a bit with your
It happens to me
memoir.
all the time. It does.
I'll talk into the mic. Sorry. Yeah.
It happened in the unfolding as well. So here's a weird. Okay.
Yes.
So
That's crazy.
There's strange threads in the unfolding. So the father is known as the big guy, and he's a little bit modeled on my biological father, who moved through the world like he was a big guy. And in the book, the daughter and father are both sort of obsessed with George Washington. And my biological father, there's two threads to this, used to tell me things like, and I only met him when I was an adult, and he said things like, kind of like, sort of implied, we're very special. Our family is very special. You don't know this, but we're super special. And we used to own Washington, D.C. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Yeah, so it turns out in 1650, they did. They owned all of Washington, like all of where the Capitol is, all of where, yeah. And the weird thing is, there's a whole scene in this book that takes place with the daughter riding her horse down the Washington, D.C. Mall, and I think that is so weird. And then weirder yet, in my biological family, one of the relative sisters married George Washington's great-grandfather, and then when she died, the other sister married him. And I'm like, I didn't even know it. I didn't even care about George Washington until I was writing this book. And I'm like, you can't make it up. You just can't.
Kudos to whoever put together this panel. This is going very well. Now, I do want to ask about maybe that actually what you're talking about, which is that I've read interviews about the unfolding, and that it started with politics and money, and then you added family, and maybe thinking also about gender, that you wanted to tell a story of two women in this family who are in some way not able to speak, while as the big guy, he talks a lot.
Well, the thing with the big guys is they don't realize how much space they're occupying. It's a theme that you might have noticed in just the world. So part of it was, and there's also another theme, which is that women in America don't write the great American novel. That's for men to do. Women are supposed to write the small domestic book. And I wanted to kind of weave the two together. So the story of the big guy and his buddies is sort of the large-scale great American novel, and then the interior story of the big guy also and his family, Charlotte and his daughter, is the smaller domestic frame, but they're obviously very much related. And I wanted to sort of play with that a little bit. And then the thing about Charlotte is Charlotte, the mother, is from a generation where women weren't asked what they want to be. They asked, who do you want to marry when you grow up? And so she really has not yet had her life. And the daughter, who's just coming of age and voting for the first time that year, 2008, begins to realize that she doesn't want to just read about history, she wants to be history, she wants to be part of history, and that it's very different to be passive versus to take an active role in creating the world you want to live in.
And that's so present in your novel, too, the idea of being an individual and a family member in history. The way your character, for example, decides to go with her brother to Auschwitz, essentially, because she can't separate from him, but she doesn't know the history that the reader knows, the kind of tragedy of writing about something that the reader already knows about. And I wonder, you know, as you were saying that, I was thinking, how does one write knowing that the reader knows more than the characters about Hitler in your book, about everything that's going to happen? How did you kind of hold the reader in your mind so well as you wrote?
Okay.
I don't think that's on the script.
No, I will. No. I will try to say it in English, but maybe I will twist if you don't mind in French. What was the most important for me, it was to understand how my family, but speaking of my family, is about Jews, how these people who were clever, smart, well educated, how they didn't see what was happening. Because they were exactly like us. That's honestly, I talk about this subject since the book came out. But these days, speaking about that is like frightening. So these people were reading papers, newspapers every day. They had traveling a lot. They were well educated. So how they didn't see the catastrophe who was arriving? And for me, this idea of how they could enter the trains, this idea became an obsession. That's why I wanted really to enter in their mind and to see the mechanism of this destruction day after day. And that's really a big part and a big part of my work, to try to d'être dans leur véritablement à leur niveau, à leur regard, et moi-même d'essayer d'oublier ce qui va arriver. À un moment donné, je dis dans le livre, at a moment I wrote in the book that the paradox of the catastrophe, que le paradoxe de la catastrophe réside à la fois dans sa lenteur et dans sa précipitation. J'ai de dire ça en anglais. The catastrophe is a paradox. A catastrophe is something that arrives very, very slowly. You have all the signs saying to you, the catastrophe is arriving. And it takes a long time. And suddenly, in 1 second, it's too late. You cannot stop the catastrophe. That's why I say it's a paradox. It's a paradox between something very slow and very quick.
And I think you write that incredibly beautifully, and the way that we focus on, in your book, the grandfather has an opportunity, but it's his ex-lover, and he's kind of mad at her, and so he doesn't listen.
The cousin, Anyuta.
It's also the cousin. It's a very juicy book. But the way that we, I think, focus on, and your book is also about how personal relationships can blind us to these upcoming kind of disasters.
Yeah, and absolutely that sense that people make decisions sort of based on a very personal reaction to something, and exactly as you said, there's a million warning signs, and people go, oh, it's not going to be that bad. I'm sure that couldn't possibly happen. And I don't know if that is a piece of human behavior, the desire to also think that a society will take care of itself or will take care of each other, and then that realization of a turn. And I think that that's like the most terrifying moment, where you realize it has turned and there's no way out.
To slightly lighten the mood, I want to talk about holidays.
That's so funny.
Each of these books has like an all-time great. I mean, they're not like cheerful holiday scenes. I'm not going to like promise the moon here, but each of the books has an amazing holiday sequence. And I was thinking about how family traditions. In your case, you have like a sequential Thanksgiving, which is of course like Americana, and in a book about America, how you treated it. And Anne, in your book, and we'll start with Anne, but thinking about the Seder in your book and the way that the narrator, who is closely hewn to you, struggles with the question of her identity at a Seder when other people are questioning whether she is actually Jewish. And a familiar experience from Seders I've been to. So I wonder if each of you might talk about like holiday and structuring and family.
I don't know how to answer that. I guess the thing I would say that's interesting to me about holidays, it's always, I look at it somewhere like between New York's Gay Pride Parade and the Halloween Parade, meaning that the strangest behavior comes out. And you think it's under control and you realize it's not. And you just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to show up. You don't know what secret is going to be revealed or what truth that was never told will be told. And I think, in a way, just from a dramatist's point of view, those are the moments that are the most revealing. I mean, they don't call it the Last Supper for nothing, you know. So I think about it, you know, that way. Yeah, and it's an interesting way of also telling a story. It's funny that I thought when you first said the thing about the holidays, there's a lot of holiday meals in all of my books. I know there's apparently a lot of eating, and a lot of people take Valium and drink Diet Coke a lot too, but.
Well, and in the unfolding, the big guy has to spend Thanksgiving alone, and essentially just like crams himself with American food until it's like he needs the American identity even when he's stripped of his family.
Yes, absolutely. He has to eat the American identity. Yes, and then there's a
since last Tuesday.
Totally. Yes, exactly. And then there's a classic Thanksgiving in Washington that really is very much about the history of kind of social Washington and the strangeness of the way in which people will have political figures and, you know, over to dinner, and there's sort of niceties that are happening at the same time as their, you know, arch enemies, and just classic, yeah.
I love those scenes. Oh, I think we have big font.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. That's executive service.
Miracle arrived.
So it's the holiday question.
Yes, but it was not on my note.
It's on page 3.
Wow, that's really bad luck. Anyway.
True. So there is 2 path-over moments in my book. 2 moments du dîner de Pessah. One in 1919 and the other one in 2019. And it was important for me because this moment of the Seder is very special. Because each year, every year, you read the same book. And what's changed is you and how you hear differently the questions of this night. And what's changed also is it's the world. And c'est comme un marqueur du temps. Et so I wanted with the second Pesach to show that I didn't know anything about Pesach. So because nobody couldn't teach us anymore because everyone was dead. So I am in this evening and I try to do as if I knew because I want to date this man, and I want to be as if I were really used to this celebration. But I take the book in the wrong way, and everybody's laughing at me, and I feel ridiculous. But it says something. It says that as a Jew, something was broken, and I couldn't know anymore how to make a Seder. And I also wanted to show that the questions in the book are always the same, but also the questions around the table. It means In 1919, they are asking if they had to fly. And in 2019, they're asking the same question.
And then you do the fantasy of fantasies, which is that a woman in this scene is quite rude. And
Yes.
100 pages later, you write a response to what you wish you'd said.
Yes.
That which is a fantasy I have all the time. And I actually wanted to read, you wrote this amazing line that has been translated by your wonderful translator, which says, "For almost 40 years, I have tried to draw a shape that resembles me." That's sort of what you wanted to say, that your permeability of your identity in this question.
Yes, because I was raised and I grew up in a total secularly family. But since I was born, I heard this word, Jew. And I knew this word was related with me. But I didn't know why. I didn't know how. I didn't know what did it mean. So that's why the book is also a quest on Jewish identity.
And I wonder, in your book, there's also a sort of form of this question. The daughter, she's so great, and she's 18, newly 18, right. Newly voted, and she's also dealing with, in her case, questions not just of her own family history, but of the role of women in society. She's doing a research project on why women ride side saddle and horses, which
yes.
activates a lot of thinking that she's had.
Yeah.
And I think similarly kind of struggling with this question of her own identity in this landscape.
Yes, and I think, the search for one's own identity or to understand oneself and one's history is a universal. And then in experiences like being Jewish and discovering family history, or in my case, being adopted and also Jewish and discovering family history, and George Washington, I could tell you, there's another weird detail is that now I'm Jewish, but I'm also now, I wanted to take back the Daughters of the American Revolution because I thought that hadn't been working out so well for many people. And so I am now a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, which is so funny as a deeply transgressive person. I'm like, yeah. And I'm a Girl Scout leader. Anyway. But all that to say, that search for self, or that search to find oneself in the world, is universal. We all do variations of it, and I think that's also why when people who have not had these experiences read the books, they find themselves in the books, and they find their own stories within these stories.
Great. Maybe a couple more from me, and then we'll turn to you, so begin thinking of brilliant questions, please, for these two great writers. One question I had for you, I hope this is on your sheet, is about names. When I was thinking about that idea of family history, so much I think of your book is about changing names, about having the wrong name. You mentioned this beautiful Daniel Mendelsohn idea of what a first name means to someone. And I wonder if you might talk about
Yes.
all the names in your book and the way family histories have to shift.
Thank you for mentioning Daniel Mendelsohn, because I really admire him. I quote him several times in my book. He's so important, and he said how the first names are important. And so one part of my book is called The First Names, and it's an exchange, a discussion an exchange of letters between my sister Claire and I about our second names, because my second name, my Hebrew name, is Miriam, so the survivor, and the second name of my sister is Noemi, and Noemi is the name of the sister who died. The sister, you have the picture on the cover. So Miriam and Noemi were two sisters. And Claire and I are two sisters, named after the previous sisters. And I wanted to know and to ask her, what does this mean for our lives? And what does it represent in our relationship, that I was the one who survived and she was the one who died? And why I was interested in this question, it's because when I was something like 25, I made like a kind of therapy, which is called family tree therapy, c'est-à-dire une thérapie par l'arbre généalogique. Donc, qu'est-ce que vous faites dans cette thérapie? What are you doing? Vous dessinez votre arbre généalogique devant un thérapeute. You draw your family tree in front of a therapist, et vous devez remonter sur 3 générations, among 3 previous generations. Et vous devez travailler, bien sûr, sur les dates de naissance, birth dates, marriages, if something, what is your place in the sibling, etc. And of course, about the first names. And you see that in all families, you have first names who were given to different people on different generations. And that's not nothing, because it means que, ça veut dire que quand vous venez au monde, vous venez comme chargé de quelque chose. Vous venez chargé d'un prénom, et au fond, vous venez chargé d'une vie qui n'est pas la vôtre, mais que vous portez sur vous. And it's like something that you have to bear, like a backpack. Et avec ce prénom et avec cette figure qui vous a précédé. And it was so interesting for me to do that therapy. And in a case, this therapy about family was like also the started of my life as a writer, because at the end of the therapy, the woman say to me, you can ask a question to your tree. And my question was, est-ce que je vais réussir à devenir un écrivain?
Nice. Okay, that was amazing, and I'm very moved by it. I do want to ask about the name The Big Guy a bit more, because it's amazing. But I think, as you were saying, families have secrets, trees have secrets that you're unfolding. You are a great writer of secrets. That was what I was thinking as I was reading through your work for this event. And in the unfolding, for example, there's like an open secret, which is that the big guy's best friend is gay, and basically everyone knows it, and no one talks about it. And there's also an incredibly closed secret that blindsided me as a reader the first time I read your book, that is only apparent once one knows it in the reading. And I wonder if you might talk about secrets in your work.
I guess, I'm always looking at and writing about the difference between our public and private selves, and the self that we present to the world, and who we are, to ourselves and within our families. And I think it's sort of often an incredible gap or space between that. And then now we also have our social media self and these idealized lives and all of the little kind of ways in which, in some ways, you could say we're firming up our identity, but we're also losing it right and left, because none of them is holistic and none of them is really accurate in some ways. So, I think, again, in the dramatic sense, secrets are super powerful. And it's funny, I have no secrets whatsoever, which is also a problem. If anyone has some that they'd like to give me, I'm happily looking for them. But I'm not good at, I don't have the storage compartment for that. So I don't know, I must be writing about them all the time.
I mean, in the book, I guess I won't spoil the secret, because I want everyone to buy the book and go home and read it. But there's one scene about 100 pages before the secret where the mother is crying in her sleep, and the scene changes its meaning when you know what she's crying about. Is that something that you're planning? Is that something that you're putting in later? Like, how, this is, I guess, a wonky question, but how do you actually do that?
Part of me goes, I didn't even know that happened. No, I'm sort of thinking about it, but not in an overt way. And I think the real answer to that is, in all of the things that I'm writing, whether they are, and I really mostly write fiction, because the funny thing is, as you were talking about the family tree, I just made so many trees in my head. I was like, wait, there's that family tree, and that family tree, and that family tree. And then there's like your literary family tree, and your like creative family tree. Anyway, I think I'm always focused on what is true or organic for the character. And so if it is a real person, how to stick to what is true for them. And if I'm deviating from that, I will acknowledge it by saying, I imagine that, or I can picture something because I want to know that I'm adding on to what is known. And otherwise, and it came from really the writer Grace Paley, who used to talk all about the truth according to the character. So I'm thinking about what brought whichever person it is to the moment where we meet them, what's central about what's happening that we all need to come and pay attention now, and where do we go from there?
Okay, last one from me, and then we'll go to questions. Question for both of you. You both write in your books about well-known historical figures. In your case, your family history is riddled with well-known historical figures. In your book, we have especially a scene with Condoleezza Rice, but also John McCain, Barack Obama.
Yeah.
These are characters that you write. And I was thinking, of course, about how in War and Peace, Napoleon's just kind of walking around and thinking. So this is an old idea that I don't see as much anymore, to use a novel. But Marcel Duchamp is like present in your novel. And,
Yes.
and so when a reader has an expectation of a historical figure, how do you still write about them so well? Either.
C'est pas facile de répondre à cette question.
Désolé.
En fait, par exemple, dans le cas de Marcel Duchamp, in case of Marcel Duchamp, I will tell you an anecdote,
That's what I was actually hoping for, yes.
qui va expliquer un peu. En fait, ces gens sont devenus très célèbres, mais à l'époque, ils étaient des gens qui ne l'étaient pas du tout. Et par exemple, j'ai retrouvé dans les archives de ma famille, I found in the archives of my family, a piece of paper when Francis Picabia writes something that everybody does, c'est quand vous avez des enfants, vous écrivez les phrases marrantes qu'ils disent. Parce qu'ils se trompent d'un mot, ils utilisent un mot pour un autre, et alors c'est charmant, et alors vous l'écrivez. And in that case, Picabia wrote this sentence, is that so his daughter, instead of saying le savon de Marseille, because in France we have soap from Marseille, and everybody use le savon de Marseille, soap from Marseille. But the little girl, his daughter, she said le savon de Marcel. And because Marcel was living at home, because it was like a love triangle, so Marcel was always here. And that's how, with a little sentence, le savon de Marcel, you can understand, you can open the door of how these people were living.
And how about you?
What she said. No. No, it's interesting because I think throughout history, writers have written books where there are these figures. And I think for me, I look at people like Norman Mailer and Don DeLillo, who have written large-scale novels in which historical figures pass through. And I guess, part of it for me is, on the one hand, I'm absolutely writing fiction with Condoleezza Rice at this Thanksgiving, but it also has to be accurate. So the references to Condoleezza's father playing the piano, playing football, everything is actually fact there. And I think if I'm using a historical figure, I don't want to deviate from what is known about them, what is believed, and I don't want to put them in an awkward situation. And I've done a lot with Richard Nixon. I did the last book, May We Be Forgiven. There's a guy who's a Nixon scholar, and in it he's talking about Nixon's short stories. And somebody said to me, "Are those real?" And I was like, "No." But Nixon was famous for staying up very late at night writing on these yellow legal pads. And I have no idea what he was writing, but I decided those were his short stories. And then they weren't published because the family decided they were against the brand.
I love that. All right, I think we have a mic in the back. So if you have an audience question, it will be passed to you. The mic is over there. You don't need our attention, you need hers.
Well, thanks for being here and for this very beautiful presentation. I devoured your book, Carte Postale, unfortunately not yet yours, when it first came out in France. So my question is, many people have family stories. As an individual, you think it'll interest other people, but the reality that most of the time it doesn't. So, what do you think makes a book successful as a family history or family memoir? Does it have to be fictionalized? Does it have to be in the form of a novel to make it a success? And what makes one really have capture the interest of the public?
Thank you. Interesting question. One of my first job in life was to write the biography of people. So I spent I don't know how many time with old people, hearing their stories and writing then stories. I wrote a lot. It was the way for me to win money when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. It was a very good formation. First, I discovered that all the lives of this generation are amazing, because this generation came through the war, and I wrote on very, very different families, Catholic families, Jewish families, people from who came from North Africa. I wrote all kind of backgrounds, and it was always like you could do a movie with all these lives. So why? It's a good question. Why suddenly you transform it, as I said, a novel? And I often say I wrote a true novel. So I will give you an example. In my book, my investigation with my mother lasts 4 months. It's everything is very fluent. In the reality, it lasted 4 years. So the skill of the writer, of the novel writer, is to twist the timelines, for example, so everything can go faster. I will give you another example. In reality, with my mother, we went, in the book with my mother, we went to the village where my family was arrested. And we knocked at one door, we met a neighbor, then another one, then another one. And it's in one morning. In reality, we met with my mother, all these neighbors, but not in one day. It's during, I don't know, many years of the investigation. That's the skill, the talent of the writer to twist the true facts, so it's like it's more comfortable to read it, more fluent.
Bonjour. I was wondering, you start your book with the story of your daughter and what happened to her, which I am assuming is a true part of this book. And I'm just curious a little bit about how, because it seemed like a big motivation for you to do kind of this investigation, right, into your family once the postcard arrives. How did that investigation inform your relationship with your mother and how that changed, but also how you related this family history to your daughter?
Good question. The relationship with my mother, first, it was so funny to do that with her. You cannot imagine, because my mother, she's really the character of the book. So yes, we were like two very bad detectives in a Serie B series, always arguing, and I was pregnant. I was when I was pregnant, but not during my investigation, but we had to drive to find the neighbors, and she was smoking in the car, and I was thinking, Mom, I'm sick. And she said, oh, my daughter, you are so boring. It's so good to be with this person, to spend time with this person. But when I was writing the book, I thought that it's not easy to become a character. And I think it's not a good news to have a writer in your family. And my problem is that I thought that as a writer, I would be quiet because it will be the others who could become characters. But unfortunately, I have a sister who is also a writer, and she had this bad idea to marry a writer. So it's a lot of writers for one family. And so I said to my mother, I will give you the pages, almost every 50 pages, so you can read and change things if you don't like them. But the funniest part of this adventure was the promotion in France, because I said to the publisher that I wanted to make the promotion with my mother. Of course, because she was part of the book. And I remember for the first paper, it was for a very important French magazine, Elle. And they said, we have 4 pages. I was just like, wow, 4 pages, that's huge. It was during the holiday, the summer. I was not with my mother. She was on Brittany. So I called her because I said, you will come to Paris, you will do this paper with the journalist, and we have to rehearsal. I will ask you questions as if I were the journalist, and you answer, and I will tell you if it's good or not. Because the problem is my mother, she was a teacher at university. So when you ask her a question, you have an answer during 2 hours with a lot of words you don't understand. And it's not the way you have to do with journalists. So it was a rehearsal, and her answers were catastrophic. I thought I had such a bad idea to do that with my mother. And when she came back to Paris for the D-Day with the journalists, and when it started, she was so good. She was funny. She said things very sharp, as if she had made that all her life. I was just like, wow, Mom. And so after I did everything with her, and also we went in all classes, high schools in France, having trip together. It was so cool.
This is the last one.
Thank you so much for this magnificent panel. True confessions, I too teach at the university, so this is coming from this. I teach literature, I teach literary history, I teach literary criticism, I write that. I have a family archive. I believe in epigenetics, and I'm very interested in how memory operates. Any thoughts in terms of how we transition to discern whether or not autofiction is the right genre? And if it is, how do we go into this versus writing nonfiction?
It's a good question. You know, I think one of the elements to think about is the psychological. So in dealing with fact and chronology, often the psychological gets left out because it's not a fact. It's a more ethereal kind of emotional state, and also one that is transmitted, you know, through generations. So when working with that, it lends itself slightly more towards fiction. But the truth of it is, I would say, we also live in a world now, and not that what you might write would be published or not published, but the most important thing is telling the story as best you can tell the story, whatever the story is, and whether that means using the tools of fiction or sticking to what is known. You do it however you can get the thing told. The only caveat to that I would say is it is important to know what is fact and what is fiction. And often these days people are not sure anymore. The alternative fact, which I'm really opposed to.
That's so important. I don't know if we have time to answer or if it's in about what is, but about how to write. You know, a French writer, Marguerite Duras, she often said that writing and cooking has a lot of to do together, and you can cook a recipe when starting from the recipe, and you buy all the elements and you do exactly, and it will be amazing. And you can also cook in and see what you have and to cook with what you have, and it will be amazing. It's not a question of judgment, what is better or from the one way or the other way. It depends on what kind of cooker you are. And me, I'm the second part, and I never think about genre, but with what I want to write and how, and with what I have in myself. About what is true and what is not true, I totally agree. It's so important to be sure, and especially when you're writing of Second World War, to be very precise about all the facts, all the events you write. And me, when I was writing my book, I wanted to write for the next generation, for the youth. So that's why I had in my mind that I didn't want to make mistakes, historical mistakes. It was so important.
Thank you both.
Thank you.